This week, I want to take you through some meal ideas using up the veggies from last week's batch prep. The veggies I prepped last week are going to help us out so much this week, but it's really only half the battle because even though they're washed and chopped and ready to use, I still need to use them up. If I don't, they will go bad and then all that time and effort will be wasted. We definitely don't want that to happen. So I want to take you through a few meals with me throughout this week. These are going to be delicious, high protein meals that are of course still packed with lots of veggies. And we are going to start with a breakfast that I have been having on repeat lately. I am a fan of anything that uses up some veggies in breakfast or morning meals. So we are actually going to use a pre-prepped jar of frozen smoothie ingredients. I actually made a video about this recently that is so easy for you to prep. You basically just put any fruits or veggies that you want and freeze it, then add all the contents to the blender with water or plant milk, and boom, you've got a delicious smoothie in no time. So I actually ended up making a couple more of these jars. I had some raw zucchini from last week's batch prep and I just used that in there along with some fruit. I used bananas and berries and of course a tablespoon of ground flax. And then I'm just gonna add some soy milk into this one for protein, along with some pea protein powder. So this protein powder is actually just made from peas. It is only one ingredient. So it's a really good option for anybody who doesn't want a flavored protein powder or they don't like the other ingredients in other protein powders. Now, the only thing about this protein powder is that it is unflavored. So it doesn't have a bad taste. It just doesn't taste like traditional protein powders, which usually have some sweeteners or flavors in them. So when I'm using this kind of protein powder, I do make sure that I just add in some fruit like bananas or berries, and that'll just make sure our smoothie isn't too bland. So lunch for me has been another just one of those get it done as easily as possible kind of meals. Last week we prepped a lot of kale and I also prepped some baby tomatoes, so we are just gonna use those to make a salad. Now sometimes I like a lot of veggie variety in my salads and sometimes I don't have a lot of veggie variety. So instead of extra veggies, we're gonna add some other flavors and textures with things we already have on hand. For protein, I have a can of lupini beans. These are great because they're really high in protein, but you could also use something like chickpeas or another bean if you prefer. I also have some seitan that I just defrosted from the freezer. Seitan, I think, is one of the highest vegan protein sources per gram. I actually did a video recently showing how to make this seitan, and I compared seitan recipes to meat recipes in terms of protein, carbs, fat, etc. And 3 out of the 4 seitan recipes that I made were actually higher in protein than meat. So for anyone thinking that a vegan protein source isn't nearly as high as meat, definitely try out seitan. And then for a bit of zing for our salad, we are going to add some red onion. Pro tip, now I cut this red onion a few days ago, and usually if I'm making something like a salad or a sandwich, I will just cut a few slices of red onion, whatever I need to add into that dish. But when you cut the whole onion, it only takes a few extra minutes. You already have the knife and cutting board out, and then you will have red onion ready to use up for the rest of the week. So next time, don't just cut one slice, cut the whole thing. We're also gonna add a bit of sweetness to this salad for balance. I'm just using some dried cranberries. And then for crunch, let's add some pumpkin seeds. And then I'm going to use this delicious balsamic drizzle and just give this all a toss. Now, besides these easy meals, sometimes I also like to make a meal that is going to last a few days in a row. So maybe it's gonna take a little bit more prep time than just throwing a couple things together and eating, but it will last us a few days, so it's totally worth it. So the first one is gonna be lasagna. We are adding 3 different kinds of vegan protein into this lasagna, and it is so, so good. If you haven't tried the tofu ricotta yet, make this lasagna and try it. So for our tofu ricotta, we're just gonna start out by cutting an onion and some garlic. Now, onions and garlic are definitely something that you can add into your batch prep as well. I usually find that I don't mind too much cutting 1 or 2 onions throughout the week, so I usually just leave it until the day that I'm making something, but they can definitely be prepped ahead and stored in your fridge for a week. And then we're just gonna add the onions to a pan to saute, and then after a minute or so, go ahead and add the garlic. Now you can add a little water here or veggie broth if your onions are starting to stick, and we're just gonna saute those for a few minutes. Now to keep this simple, I'm using my mini food processor, which is just easier to wash. So we're gonna work in batches here, and I'm just gonna add half of the tofu into the food processor with the caramelized onions and garlic. Go ahead and blitz that. We don't want it totally smooth, a few chunks are okay, but just try and get it cohesively combined. And then this is just a couple tablespoons of lemon juice. And then to the food processor, we're gonna add the rest of our tofu, a tablespoon of miso paste, 2 tablespoons of nutritional yeast, and half a teaspoon of salt. And again, go ahead and blitz that. And then we'll combine all of this together, and that will be our tofu ricotta. Now meanwhile, we're just gonna use the same pan to cook our Beyond Meat. If you didn't wanna use Beyond Meat in this recipe, you can definitely sub it for another vegan protein. We actually are also gonna add lentils into the sauce, so you could double up on the lentils if you prefer. And then once those are cooked, since we want it to be kind of a ground beef-like texture, we're just gonna chop those up into little bite-sized pieces. And now onto our sauce. This is where we're going to add a lot of veggies, but first don't forget to preheat your oven to 400 degrees. We are just starting with a clove of minced garlic, some of our prepped mushrooms, and we're just gonna saute those for a few minutes. And then we're gonna use 2 jars of marinara sauce. You can definitely use homemade if you prefer. I just find it so much easier to use store-bought. And to rinse out the jar, I'm just using a little bit of soy milk, which will give our sauce a bit of extra creaminess. And now we're adding in the chopped broccoli that I have previously steamed. We're just adding this at the end of the sauce cooking because it's already steamed. We don't need to cook the broccoli. If your broccoli is raw, you're gonna wanna add it at the same time as the mushrooms. And then also just add in our Beyond Meat, a cup of brown lentils, and then lastly, just a teaspoon of Italian seasoning. Now these oven-ready noodles are amazing. If you can find these at the store, I highly recommend them over regular lasagna noodles because you don't need to boil anything, you don't need to pre-cook anything. We are just gonna add them dry right into our lasagna. So we're gonna start at the bottom of the dish with just a little bit of our sauce, and then a layer of our dry, uncooked lasagna noodles. If any of them don't quite fit, you can just break them to fit the size of your pan, and actually save these little pieces because we can reuse them in another recipe. I'll link that one down below. And then we're gonna do a layer of sauce, add in our tofu ricotta, and then just repeat those layers until everything is used up. I usually like to leave just sauce on the top. I know some people like to do a layer of vegan cheese. You could definitely do that if you prefer, but basically we just wanna make sure that all of the noodles are fully covered. And then we're just gonna cover that with foil and bake it for 45 minutes. Then remove the foil and bake uncovered for an additional 15 minutes. And optionally, I like to top it with a little bit of nutritional yeast. And I've been serving this with a little kale salad on the side. Oh my gosh, this is such a good combo. So this is gonna be my go-to meal combo for the next couple of days. So around midweek, I like to make a couple more huge meals to get us through the week. Now, something that I know will be a welcomed meal in this house is soup. My husband is soup crazy, especially with noodle soup. So he usually just cooks his own and cooks a little personal size every night with the veggies that I've prepped. But instead, I'm actually going to make a really big pot of hot and sour soup for him, and then he can eat that for the next few days. Now, hot and sour soup is actually really simple, and the ingredients are pretty simple as well, but there are a couple specialty items, and of course I will link all of these down below in case you want to check them out. So first things first, we're gonna rehydrate some dried lily flowers, as well as some black fungus strips. These are basically just dehydrated black mushrooms. So we're just gonna rehydrate each of those and then just set those aside for an hour or so. While those rehydrate, we can prep the rest of our ingredients. We are gonna start by chopping some garlic and some green onion. And we really only need the white part of the green onion here, which is good because usually I use the top parts for other dishes. So mostly what I have on hand right now is just the white parts. But if you have full green onions, that's fine. You'll actually use the green part later to top the soup. And then I'm also just gonna prep the tofu. I am using 2 blocks of tofu in this soup to really amp up the protein. And then lastly, we're also gonna need some minced ginger, but I do happen to have some already minced in the freezer. I like to mince a really big batch in the food processor and then just store it in the freezer, and you can break off little pieces like this. And so we'll need about 3 of these to make 3 tablespoons. So we're just gonna start by sauteing the garlic, green onions, and ginger, and then add in our veggie broth. We need 12 cups of veggie broth here, and I'm just using water, and I'm gonna mix it with some Better Than Bouillon broth paste. And to that, we're gonna add in our prepped mushrooms and our tofu. And then we're gonna drain and rinse our dried lily flowers and black fungus, and we will add those in as well. And for this huge batch of soup, we are gonna need 3/4 of a cup of black vinegar, 1/4 cup of soy sauce, sesame oil. Now the original recipe actually calls for 3 tablespoons of sesame oil. I like to reduce it a bit because we try and reduce oil where we can, but there is really nothing like the flavor of sesame oil. You could substitute it with sesame seeds, it won't quite be the same. So I feel like the least I can do is to reduce the amount and just use the 1 tablespoon instead of 3. And then finally, just a couple teaspoons of sugar. I'm just using rock sugar. And we're just gonna let that soup simmer for about 20 minutes. We're gonna let the mushrooms soften and the tofu is gonna soak up all that delicious flavor. And then after about 20 minutes, we are gonna add a cornstarch slurry, which is really easy. It's just cornstarch mixed with water. And that's just gonna help add some body and thickness to the soup. And then at the very end, we're going to add our chili paste for the hot part of the hot and sour soup. And you can add this to the whole batch or just individual servings if some of your family is sensitive to spiciness. Now, I have just been really craving enchiladas lately, and I have to say, I think I've only ever made enchiladas one other time before, so I'm definitely not an expert, but I do remember it was really, really easy. Plus, I found this enchilada sauce, which I have been looking for an enchilada sauce for a long time, and I finally found this one at Whole Foods, and so I am just very excited to make some enchiladas. Now, I have also seen a couple oil-free enchilada sauce recipes, so if you did want to make your own, I will link some of those down below, but we are going for easy here, so I'm just gonna use these. So we're just gonna start by chopping an onion, and I have our already washed and prepped cauliflower pieces here. I'm just giving them a rough chop so that they're a little bit smaller and will fit much more nicely into our enchiladas. So we're just gonna saute that onion for a couple minutes and then add in our mushrooms and cauliflower and let that cook down for a few minutes. Then I'm just gonna add some garlic powder, chili powder, oregano, and paprika, and just keep letting that cook. And you can go ahead and add some water if you notice that it's sticking to the pan, but mushrooms do also release some moisture, so you shouldn't need too much here. And then lastly, we're just gonna add in our black beans and stir till everything is combined. Once our bean and veggie filling is ready, we're going to assemble the enchiladas. Now, I think it's a little bit easier to work with the corn tortillas if they are slightly pliable. So I'm just gonna heat mine in the microwave. I'm just gonna put the whole stack in there and heat them for about 20 seconds on each side. And then of course, we're gonna start off with some enchilada sauce on the bottom of our dish. And then basically we're just filling our corn tortillas with the veggie and bean mixture and placing them seam side down into the dish. Now the good thing about enchiladas is we're gonna cover the whole entire thing with sauce. So even if you get some cracks in your tortillas or you have some filling starting to spill out, don't worry, the sauce will cover all. And then I'm just gonna use a little bit of this vegan cheese on top, which is totally optional. And then we are gonna bake these at 400 degrees for 20 minutes. Now I'm also just gonna quickly prepare a side salad to go with the enchiladas. We're gonna use up some of that iceberg lettuce. Now this iceberg didn't stay prepped as nicely as I thought it would. I did notice it started to turn pink, I think from oxidation. So next time I would probably just chop it as I use it instead of pre-chopping and washing the whole head. The cilantro, however, stayed super fresh as usual. This is nearly 1 week after I did the prep and it's still super vibrant. So we've got our protein here, lots of veggies, and just some really delicious meals that honestly were so much easier to make because of the batch prep that we did last week. So if you haven't seen that video yet, you can check it out here. I will show you exactly how I washed and prepped all of these veggies to make this week so much easier.